Good morning, everyone. It's Lee Henson, president and founder of Agile Dad, and it's time for today's episode of the Daily Stand Up. So, without any further ado, let's get started. It's Friday. The week has flown by. It is time for us to do our Agile, Not So Agile episode. Something that's going to uplift you, something that's going to make you feel better, something that's going to inspire you, something that's going to warm your heart, bring you great joy, and help you be a better person. Today, I want to talk to you about the 7 pillars of self improvement. Now, this was a topic that was brought to my attention from one of our students, and they asked me if I agreed with this list of 7 pillars, or if I thought that could be modified, or if I thought that there were some things that were better. And while I agreed with holistic what was on the list, I felt like there was some logic behind that was missing. So I'm going to try to fill in those gaps and go through this list of 7 pillars for self improvement. Here we go. So coming in at number 1, habits. So this is an interesting one because you hear people always say it takes 21 days to establish a habit, to make sure you're doing things. So if you didn't know that, you have to be doing something for 3 weeks before it becomes habitual, right? Every single day for 3 weeks before it becomes habitual. With that being said, you have to change behavior to get there. And I think that's the key. I think that instead of calling it habits, I think it's changing behavior. Because I think that most of what we do when it comes to habits or behavioral change, it's all in here, right? It's all mental. And I think that it's going to help you tremendously when it comes time for you to set goals, achieve goals, and do those things. But habits are kind of like the central nervous system to being successful with self-improvement. So it's kind of the rhythm of what we do. It's our chakra, it's our center, it's our core. It is who we are, and it's going to help us improve ourselves personally. So, for example, if someone says that their goal is to become wealthy financially, okay, well, that's a crazy goal, but I'll go with it. If that's your goal, then you need to establish a habit of saving and investing. If you don't save and invest, you're never going to be wealthy. It's just one of those things where it's easy to see, right? For me, riches come from different places. I'll save that for another one. But it's just a good thing to understand how habits work. So there are tons and tons of different articles about forming habits, about establishing habits, about keeping habits and understanding habits. But just keep in mind that it's not an overnight thing either, right? It takes up to 21 days, 3 weeks to establish a habit. Coming in number 2 is goal setting. Now, goals don't have to be monumental goals. I want to go to space. That's great. But it reminds me of a dear friend that I've never met the guy, but I still consider him a dear friend just because I feel like I have a personal connection with him, named Randy Pausch. Now, Randy, he was an Imagineer for Disney, for the Walt Disney Company. He passed away, but his goals were just crazy big. I remember watching one of his videos where he said one of his goals was to play football in the NFL. Another one was to travel to outer space. I mean, this kid, when you talk about dream big, he dreamt as big as they could come. Now, what was interesting is that in line with his big goals were series of smaller goals to help him achieve his big goal. So it wasn't just a single decision, but it was a series of small decisions that caused him to reach his destination. Now, many of you have pointed out to me, or it's been a comment of interest in many of my classes, that the youth of today, the youngest citizens, as they're coming up, they really struggle with making decisions. And part of that is they don't want to feel like they're disagreeing, but at the same time, they have a different set of values or morals or character that cause them to want to be more inclusive and more, they connect more with nature. It's just really interesting to hear how the youth of today differ from the youth when we were kids. So it's one of those things where it's important for us to understand that goal setting is incredibly important, but the goals need to be in line with the person's values who's setting the goal, right? So you want to make sure your goals, and I know this is an acronym that everyone's going to know, but I'm throwing it out there. You want to make sure your goals are SMART, right? You want to do SMART goals. So just to recap, in case you're not sure what SMART was: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time boxed. As long as you can do those things, your goals are going to be easily achievable, and you're going to be able to climb the ladder and do big things. It's going to help you really, really improve what you're doing. The third one, I'm just going to call it having a system. right? And when I talk about having a system, I think that means for some people having a planner, right? That helps them. That's a system. For others, just having a calendar, having the tools you need so that you can set yourself up for success. And I think that, the opposite, the easiest way to explain what a system is to explain what the opposite. The opposite is just to go with your intuition all the time. And what that does is it causes you to kind of have this flight mechanism that just, I'm going to flutter over here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it. And there's nothing wrong with that other than you'll never have a system to completely achieve and to get to the point where you're making your goals achievable and you're doing things. So I think that systems are built based on concepts of scientific management. It's organizational theory. It's those kind of things, right? But concepts like trying to keep a schedule or to do those things, there's tons of things you can do. But I think while part of it has to do with creativity and emotional experiences, the other piece of it has to do with tying that to the practical, I need to get things done, system-based thinking, right? And I think that sometimes we fall on a far end of the pendulum on either of those two spectrums, but it's hard to meet somewhere in the middle. So we need to find a way to not have an overly rigid system, but we need to find a way to have a system nonetheless. Okay, I can live with that. Number four has to do with emotional self-regulation. Now, this is interesting because I remember a story about Oprah Winfrey when she was first hired as a news reporter at a TV station, or a news anchor rather. She got fired for being too emotionally invested in the stories. And I was like, wow. I think that you couldn't ask for anyone better to tell a story than someone who's emotionally invested. But we need to keep in mind that we need to keep our emotions in check. And sometimes I hear people say, this person or this event made me feel a certain way. Well, no, it didn't. You chose to feel that way as a result of the event happening, right? And I think that when I talk about self-regulation, it's a matter of understanding that part of our central existence is that we are here for self-improvement. And it's aimed to make us feel better. But at the same time, self-improvement means refiner's fire. It means that we're going to have to go through trial in order to reach that point of self-improvement. So sometimes we need to think about feelings, and we need to think about how we feel, or how what we're going to say is potentially going to affect other people's feelings. I'm not saying that it should make them feel a certain way, but you try to avoid doing or saying things and get to a point where you're doing some emotional self-regulating so that you're not turning into an instant pot with all this pressure built up and exploding all at once. Interesting. Coming at number 5 is being a continuous learner. Now, learning, doesn't necessarily feel like it fits here, but it does. So this is tricky because the first synonym that I'm thinking of is like studying learning, where you're actually diving into a topic and learning as much about it as you can. This is something that usually matters to students and to people who are studying for an exam, those kind of things. But on the other hand, learning is also a psychological process, right? So every time we change based on experiences that we've had or based on things that are happening in our life, each time that becomes part of the core of our self-improvement. And if it becomes part of the core of our self-improvement, that makes it a learning experience. You hear people say that all the time, right? So I think it's those kind of minutes are the ones that are the rich, deep moments that we spend that help us really understand who we are and where we're going. It's teaching us to dive deeper. It's teaching us to make priorities for ourselves. It's teaching us to learn about self-improvement and those kind of things that we can just be an all-around better person. Coming in at number 6 is the understanding of values and meaning. So, while most of these things have been very practical, this one has to do more with reflection and being purpose-driven, right? So it's taking a step away from psychology and moving more towards philosophy, if you will. It's talking about religion. There, I went there. And it's asking you, how centered are you? What do you value in life? Where are you? What perspective do you see things in? And I think that sometimes if you understand that there are a couple of different levels that you can approach this, and that you're trying to emulate the best values in others, and that you're sharing your talents openly with others, and that you understand the definition of virtue, I think that you have to know the meaning of what you're trying to do holistically in order to be able to uplift and help others. So this one to me is probably the most important one of the entire list of 7. I think that it doesn't matter how many systems you have. If you don't have this value and equity and meaning in what you do, then it doesn't matter how many systems you have, nothing's going to be valuable. You're not going to care. So it's important for you to have that piece as well. Yes. And, you can reference Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, many of the religions, and they all kind of say, hey, you've got something that you need to zoom in and focus on in order for you to be holistically, where you need to be from a centered position, right? So interesting. Last but not least, I want to talk about thoughts and beliefs. Now, this is, I know I did a podcast not too long ago called Silenzio Bruno, and it had to do with Luca, right? This is that voice in your head. It's what you say to yourself, right? So much of your mental content isn't verbal. It's just this ongoing self-narrative about I'm too weak to do this, or I'm good enough to do this, or I can't do this, or I can do this. And that affects our quality of life. So if you ask people, and I've done this before, if you surveyed a whole room full of people and you ask, hey, how many of you feel like you're really good at this, that you're centered, you understand what's going on, that you understand yourself, that you have a good spiritual grounding and a spiritual center, surrounding your thoughts and beliefs, majority of people in the room will raise their hands. But then if I ask them by show of hands, how many of you go to work and believe that everyone you work with does the same thing, I get almost 0 hands, right? Which is really, really interesting, because I think, we're self-limiting in a sense, because we don't take the time to understand our thoughts and our beliefs and where we are and what we're going to say and how we're going to do it. It's one thing to try to constantly get better. It's one thing to constantly try to hone in on your skills and to become a better person. But it's another thing for us to take it deeper into our belief system and really centralize and focus on self-improvement. So I encourage you, regardless of what religious background you are, to find something to keep you grounded and to find something to make you whole, but to dig in a little deeper and to make sure you got that covered. So one more time, we have thoughts and beliefs, and making sure we understand what our thoughts and beliefs are and how they impact us day to day. Values and meaning, which are different than thoughts and beliefs. Learning and what learning means to us. We have emotional self-regulation. A history of systems and tools that we use. Goal setting and why it's important. And finally, habits and forming good ones. So those are your 7 pillars. I hope that these help you, and I hope you have an amazing weekend. There's so many things to do and so many exciting events going on. Go out and enjoy some time. Spend some time with your family. Spend some time with your friends. Do whatever you need to do to uplift yourself and make yourself a better person. Most importantly, stay well, stay healthy, and stay tuned. We have more Agile Dad next week. Until next time, do take care.